The laughter echoed long after the recording should have ended. It bounced across the vaulted chamber of the Galactic Assembly, sharp, distorted, layered in dozens of alien tones that overlapped into something almost unbearable. Some clicked, some hissed, some resonated like low-frequency thunder, but together they carried one shared meaning: mockery. At the center of the chamber, suspended in a column of pale blue light, a human warship rotated slowly for all to see. It was unimpressive. Its hull was segmented, functional rather than elegant. Weapon ports were visible, too visible, lacking the seamless integration of advanced alien designs. Its engines flared unevenly in the simulation, struggling to maintain formation during a recorded joint exercise. A Vrax delegate leaned forward, mandibles twitching in amusement. This is their military pride. Another voice, smooth and crystalline, chimed in from across the chamber. I've seen cargo vessels with better maneuverability. More laughter followed. The recording shifted. Now the human ship attempted to fire, its weapons flashing in short, inconsistent bursts. The target, a standard Dominion drone, didn't even register the hits. Its shields absorbed the attack effortlessly. Then, with almost casual indifference, the drone returned fire. The human vessel's shields collapsed instantly. The footage ended there. Silence hung for half a second. Then the chamber erupted again. They could not even scratch basic defenses. Why were they granted assembly status? They are not a threat. They are an inconvenience. High above the chamber floor, in a section reserved for minor species representatives, a single human stood among them. Commander Elias Varn. He didn't react, didn't shift, didn't speak, didn't even blink. His hands were clasped behind his back, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the fading hologram where the human ship had just failed, again, for the entire galaxy to see. A nearby delegate, tall, translucent, its form rippling like liquid glass, tilted toward him. You must understand, it said, voice almost sympathetic. This is not personal. Varn said nothing. It is simply observable reality. Still nothing. Below, the assembly moderator struck the central dais, calling the chamber to order. The classification stands, the moderator announced. Humanity will remain designated as a non-combatant level civilization for purposes of strategic consideration. A pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, they are not a factor. More scattered laughter. This time, it didn't even try to hide itself. Varn finally moved, just a small motion, his gaze lowering slightly, as if considering something far more important than the chamber around him. Then he turned. No protest, no argument, no defense. He simply walked out, far from the assembly, far from the noise and the judgment. Space stretched in cold, indifferent silence. An asteroid field drifted at the edge of a forgotten system, uncharted, unremarkable, ignored by every major power in the galaxy, which was exactly why it had been chosen. At first glance, it was nothing more than rock and shadow, but as a lone maintenance vessel approached, something changed. A flicker, a distortion, then light. Massive structures phased into visibility between the asteroids, unfolding like something awakening from a long sleep. Docking arms extended. Shield grids shimmered into existence. Entire sections of what had been perfectly hidden now revealed themselves in silent precision. A shipyard, not small, not temporary, enormous. The maintenance vessel drifted closer, dwarfed instantly by the scale of what surrounded it. Workers inside the cockpit fell silent as their sensors struggled to process the mass now before them. "Is that?" one of them whispered. The pilot didn't answer, because ahead, partially obscured by scaffolding and shadow, something even larger loomed. At first, it looked like part of the shipyard itself, until it moved, slowly, deliberately. A section of the structure shifted, revealing a surface unlike anything in known design. Smooth, seamless, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. No visible seams, no weapon ports, no engines, just presence. The worker nearest the viewport leaned forward, breath catching. "That's not a station." The words barely left his mouth. "It's a ship. Back on Earth. Deep beneath layers of reinforced steel and stone, Commander Varn stepped into a secured command chamber. The door sealed behind him with a heavy, final sound. Inside, a small group of officials waited, silent, tense. No one mentioned the assembly. No one needed to. One of them slid a datapad across the table. "Authorization is ready," she said. "Final confirmation required." Varn picked it up. For a moment, he just looked at it. All the laughter, all the dismissal, all the certainty of a galaxy that believed it already understood humanity. His thumb hovered over the confirmation field, then pressed down. "Begin Phase 1, he said quietly. Across the stars, the hidden shipyard came alive. Power surged through systems that had never been activated. Lights ignited along the surface of the massive, unfinished warship, and deep within its core, something began to wake. No alarm sounded. No warnings were sent. But in distant systems, long-range sensors flickered just for a fraction of a second. An anomaly, a spike, gone before it could be recorded. Most dismissed it as interference. One technician, half asleep at his station, frowned at the data. "That's strange." He leaned closer, trying to isolate the signal, but it was already gone, as if it had never been there at all. In the darkness of the asteroid field, the warship remained motionless, silent, hidden, waiting, not for recognition, not for approval, but for the moment when the galaxy would finally understand exactly what it had laughed at. At first, no one noticed. Why would they? Human trade convoys had always been small, easy to overlook among the massive cargo fleets of dominant species. Their diplomatic envoys were polite, quiet, rarely central to any major decision. So when a few routes went silent, it barely registered. A delayed shipment here, a canceled meeting there. Nothing unusual, nothing important, until the pattern began to form. Another withdrawal? The Vrax analyst leaned closer to the holographic map, mandibles tightening as several human trade lines dimmed out of existence. "Yes," his subordinate replied. "Third sector the cycle. They pulled all commercial traffic." "No explanation?" "None provided." The analyst let out a low, amused hiss. "They retreat faster than expected." Across the room, a different voice chimed in. "Should we interpret this as fear?" A pause, then scattered chuckles. "Of course it is," the analyst said. "They've seen what happens to those who resist." He gestured lazily, and the display shifted, showing the now infamous footage of a human ship failing in combat. "They are adapting," he continued. "Poorly." More laughter. The conclusion was simple. Humans were backing down. But they weren't. They were vanishing. On the outer edges of human-controlled space, entire stations powered down without warning. Docking ports sealed. Communication arrays went dark. To outside observers, it looked like abandonment. To those inside, it was something else entirely. "Shut it all off," a supervisor ordered, his voice echoing through the industrial complex. "Everything that isn't essential, cut it, but we'll lose external contact." That's the point. One by one, lights dimmed across the station. Massive processing rigs slowed to a halt. Data streams disconnected. And then, silence. The kind that wasn't empty but intentional. Deep beneath the surface of a mining colony, drills screamed as they cut through layers of rock never meant to be disturbed. "Depth check. Passing 20 kilometers. "Keep going," the foreman snapped. "Command wants deeper." "Sir, we're already beyond safe thresholds." "I didn't ask for safe." The drill shuddered violently as it struck something. Not rock, not metal. Something different. The entire chamber went still. "Report." A technician scanned the readings, confusion creeping into his voice. "It's not matching any known composition. Can we extract it?" A pause. Then, "We can try." Across dozens of systems, similar scenes played out. Factories retooled overnight. Civilian industries converted into something unrecognizable. Shipyards that once produced modest vessels now operated under complete lockdown, their outputs hidden behind encrypted signals and sensor-blocking fields. Even internal communications became restricted. Need to know only. And almost no one needed to know. But the galaxy was starting to notice. In a neutral observation station positioned near human space, a cluster of analysts gathered around a fluctuating sensor feed. "I'm telling you it was there," one insisted, replaying the data for the third time. "There's nothing," another replied flatly. "Just background noise." The first analyst shook his head. No, look, right here. For a fraction of a second, the display flickered. A shape, massive, impossible to fully resolve. Then gone. The room fell quiet. Could be a sensor glitch, someone offered, or a cloaking failure, another suggested. That earned a few skeptical looks. From humans, one of them said, almost laughing, they can barely maintain shield integrity. The tension broke. The moment passed. Logged, filed, ignored. Except it kept happening. Brief anomalies, unexplained distortions, objects too large to classify, appearing just at the edge of detection, then vanishing before confirmation. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they form a question no one was asking. Meanwhile, on the borders of human territory, alien patrols grew bolder. A Vrax frigate drifted just inside restricted space, its weapons idling but ready. Still no response, the captain asked. None, his officer replied. No communications. No defensive posture. The captain leaned back, satisfied. They're folding, he said, just as predicted. He tapped the command into his console, pushed further in. The frigate advanced. Still no response. No warning. No resistance. Just emptiness. On a distant human colony world, civilians watched as news feeds struggled to explain what was happening. Official sources state that strategic realignment is underway. Temporary reductions in external engagement. No cause for concern. But the people could feel it. Something was changing, not collapsing, not retreating, focusing. In orbit above that same colony, an old defense platform powered down completely. For years, it had stood watch, obsolete, underfunded, barely operational. Now its final systems went dark. From the surface, it looked like humanity had just given up its last line of defense. What no one saw was the transfer. Every ounce of remaining power, every scrap of usable material redirected, sent elsewhere. Far away, hidden within the asteroid field, the shipyard pulsed with life. Construction drones swarmed like insects across an incomprehensible structure. Sections locked into place with mechanical precision. Energy conduits flared as they connected. Entire segments of the warship shifted, aligning as if guided by something beyond simple programming. It was growing, faster than anything should. Inside the command deck, engineers monitored systems that barely made sense, even to them. Core stabilization at 80%. Shield lattice integration holding. Power output is rising. How much? The engineer hesitated. Beyond projected limits. A silence followed that. Not fear. Something closer to awe. Back on Earth, Commander Varn stood before a panoramic display of the warship's progress. No smile. No pride. Just focus. Status? On schedule, an officer replied. Faster, actually. Varn nodded once. Good. He turned slightly, eyes narrowing at a new data stream appearing on the display. Border activity? Increasing. Vrax patrols are probing deeper. Response? None. A pause. Then Varn said quietly, Let them. Out in the void, the half-seen shape moved again. Not fast, not detectable by conventional means, but closer, always closer. And this time, it didn't fully disappear. For just a moment longer than before, the sensors held it, enough to measure, enough to realize. That's not possible, the technician whispered, staring at the data, because the mass reading didn't match a ship, or a station, or anything in any known database. It was too large, too dense, too deliberate. Then the signal vanished. Again, leaving behind only one undeniable truth. Something was coming, and the galaxy still thought humanity was running away. The first explosion wasn't even visible from the surface. It happened in orbit. A human defense satellite, old, barely operational, simply vanished in a flash of white light. No warning, no signal, just gone. Seconds later, the sky lit up. On the colony below, people stopped mid-step. A child pointed upward. Mom, what is that? At first, it looked like a second sunrise, bright streaks tearing across the upper atmosphere. But they didn't fade. They multiplied. Dozens of burning lines carved through the sky, descending faster than sound. Then came the thunder. In orbit, the Vrax fleet moved with terrifying precision. Sleek, predatory warships formed a blockade above the colony, their hulls gleaming with cold efficiency. Energy signatures pulsed along their weapons arrays. charging in synchronized rhythm. Orbital defenses eliminated, one officer reported. Minimal resistance, another added. At the center of the formation, the Vrax command vessel hovered, vast, armored, untouchable. Its commander watched the planet below with mild interest. Begin surface cleansing, he ordered. No hesitation, no emotion. The first strikes hit the outer cities. From the ground, they looked almost slow, glowing spheres descending in silence before impact. Then, light swallowed everything. Buildings dissolved. Streets vanished. Shock waves rippled outward, flattening everything in their path. The delay came after, a deep, rolling roar that shook the bones of the planet itself. Emergency sirens screamed across the colony. Take cover. Take cover. Evacuate to underground sectors. Orbital strike in progress. This is not a drill. People ran. Some didn't make it. Above it all, the Vrax fleet broadcast the attack live. Across the galaxy, screens flickered to life. Trade stations, military outposts, civilian networks. The message was clear. This is what happens to the weak. In the Galactic Assembly, the same chamber that once echoed with laughter now watched in silence. No one spoke, not because they were shocked, but because this was expected. A demonstration, a correction. Signal Human Command. One delegate said, almost casually, offer surrender terms. The transmission was sent. Moments later, a response came through. Audio only. Calm. Measured. This is Commander Elias Varn of the United Earth Defense Command. We request an immediate ceasefire and diplomatic negotiation. A pause. Then, laughter. Not as loud as before, but colder, more certain. You are in no position to request anything, the Vrax commander replied, his voice broadcast across every channel. You are being erased. The transmission cut. The bombardment intensified. Back on the colony, the sky burned. Entire districts were gone, reduced to smoldering scars. Fires spread unchecked. Communication towers collapsed. Defense grids, already weak, failed completely. A group of survivors huddled in a shattered transit tunnel, the ground trembling with each distant impact. Where's the fleet? Someone whispered. No one answered, because everyone knew there wasn't one. Far away, in the silence of deep space, Commander Varn stood alone on command deck. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of data streams cascading across the walls. No chaos, no shouting, just quiet efficiency. Colony status? He asked. An officer responded, voice tight but controlled. Severe losses. Orbital control fully compromised. Varn nodded once. No visible reaction. Vrax fleet composition? 12 primary warships. Support escorts. Standard Dominion assault formation. Another pause. Then, are they broadcasting? Yes, Commander. Full spectrum transmission. Good. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on the central display. Then the galaxy is watching. In the hidden asteroid shipyard, everything stopped. For a single moment, the entire structure went still. Then, power surged. Not gradually, not safely. All at once, lights ignited across the massive warship surface, racing along its hull like veins of fire. Systems that had never been fully activated roared to life, pushing beyond every tested limit. Inside the core, something shifted, aligned, awakened, energy output spiking. An engineer shouted, containment levels barely holding. Do we shut it down? A voice cut through the panic. No. Commander Varn's image appeared across every station. Proceed. Back in orbit above the burning colony, the Vrax fleet prepared for final escalation. Surface resistance negligible. An officer reported, we can conclude operations within the hour. The commander nodded. Do it. Weapons charged. Targeting arrays locked. And then, every system flickered. Just for a second. Report. The commander snapped. Unknown interference. The officer froze mid-sentence. Sir, sensors just went offline. All of them? Yes, sir. Long range, mid-range, everything. A ripple of unease spread across the bridge. "That's not possible," the commander said. But even as he spoke, the stars outside the viewport seemed to bend, not dramatically, not visibly enough to alarm the untrained eye. But something was wrong, something subtle, something approaching. Across multiple systems, long-range detection arrays simultaneously failed. Screens went dark, signals dropped. For a fraction of a second, the galaxy lost sight of that entire sector. In the assembly chamber, delegates shifted uneasily. What just happened? No idea. Sensor blackout across 12 systems. Interference. From what? No one had an answer. Back on the Vrax's command ship, emergency systems struggled to recalibrate, trying to reestablish scans. "Hurry! I'm getting something." The display flickered. Static. Distortion. Then, a reading. The officer stared at it. "That can't be right." "Say it." The officer swallowed. "There's an object entering the system." The commander frowned. "Size." A long pause. Then quietly, "I don't have a scale for it." Deep in the darkness between stars, something moved. Not fast, not loud, but unstoppable. On the human command deck, Varn finally gave the order, "Activate Aegis." And for the first time since the war began, humanity stopped asking and started answering. For a few seconds, the universe went blind. Not dark, just empty. Sensor grids across 12 star systems flickered, failed, and then struggled to come back online. Automated systems rebooted. Backup arrays kicked in. Emergency diagnostics flooded every console. And still, nothing made sense. On the Vrax's command ship, tension replaced confidence. Reacquiring signal. Standby. Static crawled across the main display. Broken fragments of data, struggling to form a coherent image. "Come on," the sensor officer muttered. Then, a shape appeared. Faint, distorted, but undeniably there. The officer froze. "Sir," the commander stepped forward. "Report." I'm reading an object." "That's obvious." "Size." Silence. The officer's hands hovered over the console, as if afraid to confirm what he was seeing. "Unknown." The commander's voice sharpened. "Everything has a size." "Yes, sir," the officer said quietly, "but this doesn't fit any known scale." The image stabilized slightly, enough to see it, and when it did, the entire bridge fell silent. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't even a formation. It was one thing. A single, massive silhouette drifting into the system like a shadow given form. No visible engine flare. No heat signature. No warp distortion. It wasn't arriving. It was simply there. "Magnify." The commander ordered. The display zoomed in. Details emerged slowly, as if the ship itself resisted being understood. Its surface was smooth, too smooth, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. No seams. No visible weapon systems. No identifiable structure that matched any known design philosophy. It didn't look advanced. It looked deliberate, as if every part of it existed for a purpose no one else could comprehend. "Is it one of ours?" an officer asked, though the answer was already obvious. "No," the commander said flatly. A pause. Then, almost reluctantly, "It's human." On the colony below, the bombardment had slowed. Not stopped, but hesitated. Because even the Vrax fleet, ruthless and efficient, had begun to notice something was wrong. Ships shifted slightly in orbit, their formations loosening as attention turned away from the surface, upward, toward the void. In underground shelters, survivors clung to flickering screens as emergency broadcasts struggled to maintain signal. At first, all they saw was static. Then, a single image broke through, a distant view of space above their world, and something blocking the stars. "Is that?" No one finished the question, because no one had an answer. Back on the Vrax command ship, alarms began to sound, not loud, not urgent, but insistent. "Proximity alert," the system warned. "Proximity," the commander snapped. "It's still outside engagement range." "No, sir," the officer said, voice tightening. "It's not moving closer." A beat. It's already here. The warship didn't accelerate, didn't maneuver. It simply drifted forward, positioning itself between the Vrax fleet and the planet below. Slow, effortless, inevitable. Open a channel, the commander ordered. A moment later, the connection established. Unidentified vessel, he began, his voice carrying the same cold authority that had commanded countless victories. You are interfering with a Dominion operation. Identify yourself and withdraw immediately. Silence. No response. The commander's mandibles twitched. I will not repeat myself. Across every Vrax ship, every command console, every sensor array, a signal appeared. Not transmitted. Inserted. It wasn't audio at first. Just text. Simple. Clear. Unavoidable. Stand down. The bridge crew stared at the message. Do we receive that? One officer asked. No. Another replied, his voice barely above a whisper. It's inside the system. Then the audio came. A human voice. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. You were warned. The commander's eyes narrowed. Humans, he said, almost with disbelief. Then louder. This is your final mistake. He turned sharply toward his weapons officer. Fire. The Vrax fleet responded instantly. Energy surged across their ships as weapon arrays lit up in synchronized brilliance. Plasma cannons charged. Kinetic launchers aligned. Targeting systems locked onto the massive silhouette ahead. For a moment, everything held, a breath before the storm. Then, they fired. The void erupted. Streams of plasma tore through space. Glowing arcs of destructive energy converging on a human warship. Kinetic rounds followed, dense, relativistic projectiles designed to shatter even the strongest shields. The combined force was overwhelming. Enough to annihilate fleets. Enough to crack planetary defenses. Enough to end this. The impact came all at once. Light swallowed the warship completely. From the colony below, the sky turned white, brighter than any star, brighter than any sunrise. The shockwave rippled outward, distorting space itself. For a moment, there was nothing else. Then the light faded. On the Vrax command ship, every eye fixed on the display, waiting, expecting debris, wreckage, anything. Instead, they saw it, still there, exactly where it had been. No damage, no visible shielding, no movement, just untouched. A silence fell over the bridge, not confusion, not disbelief, something deeper, something colder. Report, the commander demanded, but no one answered, because there was nothing to report. Their full assault had done nothing. Then the warship moved, not forward, not back, just enough to be noticed. And across every Vrax system, a new signal appeared. This time, it wasn't a warning. Response sequence initiated. The first thing the Vrax noticed wasn't destruction. It was absence. Their weapons had not failed in the way soldiers understood failure. Nothing had exploded. Nothing had misfired. No systems had overloaded in panic or error. Instead, entire sections of fleet simply stopped responding. Engine control offline. Weapon systems unresponsive. Shields no longer cycling. One after another, reports came in like falling dominoes. Calm voices turned uncertain. Uncertainty turned to urgency. Urgency began to fracture. On the command bridge, the Vrax captain stood motionless as his tactical display collapsed into cascading red alerts. That's impossible, he said quietly. A second later, his ship confirmed it. They were not being destroyed. They were being shut down. Outside the viewport, the human warship hung in space like a silent judge. Unmoving, unhurried, unbothered. The Vrax fleet had unleashed its most devastating volley moments ago. Enough firepower to erase continents. And yet, the human vessel remained exactly as it had been before. Untouched, unmarked, unchanged. That fact alone was beginning to spread fear through systems designed to never feel it. Re-engage weapons, the captain snapped. Nothing happened. Override protocols. Still nothing. An officer's voice cracked. Sir, manual controls are locked out. That's not possible. It's not locked, another voice corrected, almost whispering. It's gone. On every Vrac ship, screens flickered, not to black, but to the same symbol. A simple human emblem, and beneath it, text appeared. System access revoked. The bridge fell silent, not because they didn't understand the words, but because they did. Far away, on the colony below, survivors watching emergency broadcasts saw something no one expected. The orbital bombardment had stopped mid-execution. Firestorms froze in the atmosphere. Energy beams dissipated before impact. Entire fleets above the planet went dark in staggered silence, like puppets suddenly cut from their strings. One child, hiding beneath a collapsed transit overpass, pointed upward. "Mom, why did the stars stop moving?" She had no answer. Back in orbit, the Vrac's captain took a step forward, gripping the edge of his console. "Tell me we still have propulsion." The officer swallowed. "Yes, but it's not responding to command input." "Then move us." "We can't." A pause. Then quietly, "Something else is moving us." The human warship shifted. Barely. Just a fraction of its mass rotating into alignment with the Vrac's formation. It didn't need weapons firing to be felt. Every ship in the fleet registered it at once. Not through sensors, but through system-wide disruption. Like reality itself was bending around it. One by one, Vrac's vessels drifted out of formation, engines dead, control systems inert, drifting helplessly in the void. Not exploding, not resisting, just ceasing function. "This is a hack!" One officer shouted suddenly. "They've infiltrated the network." Another shook his head violently. No, this is not cyber warfare. This is..." He stopped, because he couldn't finish the thought, because there was no known category for what they were experiencing. The captain turned back toward the human warship. For the first time since the engagement began, his voice wasn't commanding. It was uncertain. "What are you?" Silence answered him. Then the reply came, not from any channel they could isolate, but everywhere, inside every system, inside every ship, inside every display. A single line of text appeared again. "You were never in control." Something snapped, not physically, psychologically. A Vrac's officer backed away from his console. Another stared at flickering data streams like they were hallucinations. Panic, controlled, disciplined panic, began to creep through the bridge. "This is intimidation," someone said desperately. "It's psychological warfare." From a single ship, another snapped. "It's a bluff." But even as they spoke, their ships continued to die. On the human warship, Commander Elias Varn stood still. He wasn't watching the chaos. He was watching the pattern. Every Vrac's vessel disabled. Every system overwritten. Every attempt at resistance neutralized before it could fully form. Efficient, precise, controlled, not destruction. "Correction." "Status?" he asked quietly. An officer responded immediately. "Fleet neutralization at 62%. Civilian casualties?" "Minimal. Orbital weapons fully disabled before sustained fire could reach lower atmosphere." Varn nodded once. "Continue." Back in Vrac space, the captain made a decision. "Divert all remaining power to Command Core," he ordered. "We break their signal or we die trying." His officers hesitated. "Do it." Systems rerouted. Power surged. For a brief moment, hope returned. The bridge light stabilized. Displays flickered back to partial function. "See," the captain said, "they are not invincible." Then everything stopped again, but this time more completely. The human warship emitted nothing visible. No beam, no pulse, no explosion. Just a single silent command propagated through every remaining system in the fleet. And one by one, the Vrac's ships powered down completely. Not destroyed, not damaged, just finished. On the bridge, the captain staggered. "What did they do?" he whispered. An officer looked up slowly. "We're still alive," he said. A pause. Then, even quieter, "I think that's the punishment." Outside, the human warship remained, watching, waiting, And for the first time since the battle began, it spoke again, not to threaten, not to warn, but to conclude. Engagement complete. Silence didn't follow the battle. It replaced it, not as absence, but as dominance. The Vrax fleet, once a proud formation of overwhelming force, now drifted like broken relics across orbit. Engines dead, weapons inert. Shields collapsed into nothing more than fading signatures on half-functional displays. No explosions marked their defeat. No final desperate sacrifice. Just stillness. And that was what terrified them most. On the Vrax command bridge, emergency lighting flickered weakly over cracked consoles and frozen tactical maps. Officers stood frozen, as if movement itself might draw attention to their existence. The captain remained upright, but barely. His voice, when it came, was no longer commanding. It was hollow. Report remaining fleet status. A long pause. Then an officer answered, slowly. 78% of vessels fully disabled. Remaining ships unresponsive but intact. Another swallowed. No hull breaches detected. No internal damage. Life support systems are still functioning. A beat. They chose not to kill us. That last sentence lingered too long in the air, because no one knew if it was mercy or something worse. Far beyond the battlefield, the human warship, HSS Resolute, drifted in perfect alignment with the disabled fleet. Its presence was no longer mysterious, no longer unknown. It was understood, and that understanding was far more dangerous. Inside its command core, systems pulse in quiet synchronization, not chaotic, not reactive, designed. Every action had already been calculated before the first shot was fired. On board, Commander Elias Varn stood in front of a holographic battlefield map. The entire engagement played out in silent precision, each Vrax ship marked, each system status tracked, each failure logged in real time. No emotion crossed his face, only evaluation. An officer beside him spoke carefully. Fleet neutralization complete. No collateral damage beyond military targets. Varn nodded. Civilian structures? Untouched. Orbital fire was intercepted before atmospheric penetration reached critical threshold. Another pause. Then the officer hesitated. Commander, why didn't we destroy them? For a moment, Varn said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the drifting wreckage outside. Then, quietly, because destruction is easy, he stepped forward. Control is harder. The doctrine of humanity had never been written as a public document. It was not shared in assemblies, not broadcast across networks, not taught in academies beyond a select few. It was learned, built from observation, from loss, from centuries of watching civilizations rise and collapse under predictable patterns of arrogance. And it had one principle: win without becoming the monster you are fighting. Back in Vrax space, the remaining officers tried to regain control. We still have communication uplinks, one insisted. Signal the nearest fleet, request reinforcement. Another officer looked at him sharply. Reinforcement from where? No one answered, because they all understood the truth forming around them. There was no immediate reinforcement coming fast enough. And even if there was, would it matter? A flicker returned to one of the tactical displays. Not external input, internal activation. A Vrax technician leaned closer. What is that? Lines of code appeared across their systems. Not hacking, not intrusion, more like rewriting. The officer stepped back. It's inside our architecture. That's impossible. But even as he spoke, entire weapon subsystems began unlocking themselves, then immediately disabling again. Not broken, not destroyed, controlled. Across the fleet, the same realization spread. They were not being erased. They were being restrained. On the human warship, a junior officer spoke quietly. Commander, we're receiving stabilization feedback from disabled vessels. Systems are attempting self-repair, but all combat functions remain locked. Varn nodded once. Maintain override. Yes, sir. A pause. Then the officer added, more uncertain. Some of them are requesting communication. That caught attention. Varn turned slightly. Open a channel. The connection formed instantly, but not as expected. No Vrax command codes. No encrypted protocols. Just audio. Raw. Unfiltered. The Vrax captain's voice came through, strained but steady. "This is Dominion Fleet Command Vessel Arkvare. Identify your command structure." Silence on the human bridge. Then Varn stepped forward. "I am Commander Elias Varn." A pause. Then the Vrax captain responded, carefully. "You have demonstrated significant capability. We request terms of disengagement." A subtle shift in tone. Not arrogance anymore. Assessment. Survival logic. Varn didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the map again. At the disabled fleet. At the colony still burning in the distance. At the galaxy watching. Then he spoke. "You attacked a civilian world under the assumption of superiority." The Vrax captain hesitated. "That is standard doctrine." "No," Varn said calmly. "That is standard assumption." A long silence followed. Then Varn continued. "We did not respond to prove strength." His voice lowered slightly. "We responded to end the assumption." On the Vrax bridge, no one spoke. For the first time, they were listening instead of reacting. Varn turned back to the display. "This engagement is not a declaration of war." A pause. "It is a demonstration of consequence." Across space, systems that had been locked began to stabilize. Not freed, not restored, balanced. The human warship did not advance further. It did not destroy. It did not retreat. It simply remained between the Vrax fleet and the colony below. A barrier, a message, a doctrine made visible. And in the silence that followed, one truth spread across every surviving Vrax channel. They had not lost the firepower. They had lost the understanding. Because humanity hadn't come to fight a war. They had come to find how wars ended. The galaxy did not react immediately. At first, it refused to believe what it was seeing. Entire Vrax war fleets, dominant, battle-tested, feared across 3 spiral arms, were no longer fighting. They were paused, frozen mid-engagement, drifting in orbit like abandoned machines that had forgotten their purpose. Weapons online but inaccessible. Engines active but unresponsive. Command crews still alive, still breathing, still thinking, but no longer in control. And at the center of it all, a single human warship, HSS Resolute, unmoving, unchallenged, unmistakable. In the Galactic Assembly Chamber, the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't louder. It was emptier. The same delegates who once mocked humanity now stared at live tactical feeds in complete silence. No jokes, no commentary, no confident predictions. Just watching, waiting for the moment it would start making sense again. It didn't. A senior Vrax political envoy finally spoke, breaking the tension. "This is not possible." A dozen eyes turned toward him. He continued, voice tighter now. "A single vessel cannot neutralize an entire fleet without destruction. It violates every known principle of warfare." A human representative, seated among the lower tiers, finally lifted his head for the first time in the entire session. He spoke softly. "Then your principles were incomplete." The Vrax envoy bristled. "Are you suggesting this is acceptable?" The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the projection again, at the silent fleets, the disabled ships, the colony still burning but no longer being attacked. Then he said, "I'm suggesting you are watching the difference between winning a battle and ending a war." Elsewhere, panic was beginning to replace disbelief. Dominion border systems attempted emergency mobilization. Relay stations tried to re-establish contact with the disabled fleets. Backup commands were issued, overridden, blocked, then ignored entirely. Nothing was responding correctly. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't destruction. It was governance. Silent, absolute governance over battlefield systems that were no longer permitted to behave as weapons. On the Vrax command vessel Arkvare, the captain stood at the center of his bridge like a man surrounded by ghosts. "Attempt system reboot," he ordered again. Nothing. Manual override? No response. Then cut power to auxiliary networks and restart from core backups. The officer hesitated. "Sir, core systems are not accepting reset authorization." A pause. The captain's mandibles tightened. That doesn't make sense. Another officer spoke more carefully. Sir, it's not refusing. A beat. It's ignoring us. Outside, the human warship remained in position, but something about it had changed. Not in shape, not in movement, in perception. It no longer looked like a weapon waiting to strike. It looked like a conclusion that had already been reached. On board the Resolute, Commander Elias Varn stood alone on the observation deck. Before him, the battlefield stretched across holographic space. Every vessel, every system, every trajectory mapped in perfect clarity. An officer approached quietly. Commander, we're receiving widespread surrender requests. Varn didn't turn. From whom? Multiple Dominion fleets. Several neutral systems. Even fringe alliances are requesting terms. A pause. They're calling it the human event. That finally made him look up slightly. Event? The officer nodded. Not war. Not invasion. Just event. A beat. Something that happened to them. Varn stepped closer to projection. The Vrax fleet still hung in orbit, disabled but intact. Their weapons were still there. Their strength was still there. But their control was gone. And that was the point. Send response, Varn said. The officer hesitated. To all factions? Yes. Message content? Varn took a moment, then spoke clearly. Humanity does not seek expansion. A pause. We do not seek dominance. Another. We seek stability. He turned slightly toward the glowing map of disabled fleets. And stability requires understanding consequences. Across the galaxy, the message propagated instantly, not as propaganda, not as negotiation, as fact. In the assembly chamber, a new silence fell. This one was different, heavier, more uncertain, because now they understood something they hadn't before. This wasn't a display of strength. It was a demonstration of restraint, and restraint implied capability. A younger delegate finally spoke. Are they going to continue? No one answered, because the question itself was flawed. It assumed this had been a beginning, when everything about it felt like an ending. Back in Vrax space, the captain lowered himself into his command seat. For the first time since the battle began, he removed his grip from the console, not in defeat, in realization. We didn't lose a fleet, he said quietly. His officers looked at him. We lost the ability to decide how it fights. A long silence followed. Then another officer asked softly, Then what are we now? The captain stared at the drifting ships outside, observed. Far beyond them, the human warship finally shifted position, not toward destruction, not toward conquest, but away from the battlefield entirely, slowly, deliberately, as if its purpose there had already been fulfilled. And in that movement, across every monitored channel, one truth settled into the galaxy like gravity. Humanity had not come to participate in war. They had come to redefine what it meant for war to end. And now that it had begun, no one was certain it could ever begin again the same way. The galaxy expected demands. Conquest, tribute, territory, punishment. That is what history always taught. When a superior force revealed itself, it expanded until it was satisfied, or until it collapsed under its own weight. So when humanity did neither, the uncertainty became more terrifying than war. In the Galactic Assembly Chamber, no one spoke for a long time after the transmission ended. The holographic feed still lingered in the center of the hall. Disabled Vrax fleets drifting silently in orbit, their once feared silhouettes now reduced to motionless monuments of restraint. No destruction. No annihilation, just enforced stillness. Finally, a delegate from the soaring clades broke the silence. They could have taken everything, she said quietly. A few heads turned toward her. They didn't. That single observation shifted the atmosphere again, not toward relief, toward confusion. On the edge of Vrax space, the Archvare remained intact but powerless. Its captain stood at the viewport, watching human ships, small, precise, methodical, move through a disabled fleet like surgeons in a field of giants. They were not finishing the job. They were stabilizing it. One by one, drifting warships were gently guided into holding vectors. Weapon systems were locked into safe mode. Engines were disabled without rupture. Life support was normalized. It was not surrender enforcement. It was containment. A Vrax officer finally asked, voice subdued, "Why are they helping us?" No one answered, because the only honest answer was unacceptable. On the human warship HSS Resolute, Commander Elias Varn oversaw the final phase of disengagement. Reports streamed in across his console. All hostile vessels secured. No civilian casualties in secondary zones. Regional conflict containment successful. An officer approached. "Commander, Dominion leadership is requesting formal negotiation." Varn nodded once. Routed through secure channel. A pause. "Also, multiple factions are requesting clarification of intent. They're calling it unprecedented." Varn didn't look up. It is... That simple confirmation hung heavier than any threat. Minutes later, a secure interspecies channel opened. The Vrax High Commander appeared first, no longer armored for war, but still visibly composed. Behind him, other faction representatives waited in uneasy silence. He spoke carefully. "Human Commander Varn, your actions have ended the conflict in this sector." A pause. "We require clarification of your objective." For a moment, Varn said nothing. Then he stepped forward into view of the transmission. His voice was steady, unhurried. "You assumed this was about victory." The Vrax commander hesitated. "Is it not?" Varn shook his head slightly. "No." A silence followed that answer, deep enough that even distant observers in the assembly leaned closer. Varn continued. "This was about correction." Across the galaxy, systems that had been locked down began to stabilize further. Disabled fleets were no longer drifting aimlessly. Human recovery vessels were actively ensuring structural integrity, preventing collapse, preventing loss. It was not mercy. It was control applied with precision. The Vrax commander narrowed his gaze. Correction of what? Varn looked at the projection for a long moment, then answered, "Assumption of superiority without consequence." A beat. "You believed weakness was permanent." Another pause. "We disprove that assumption." In the assembly chamber, the word assumption echoed more than anything else, because it applied to everyone, not just the Vrax. A younger human delegate, watching from a lower tier, finally whispered, "So this is it." A colleague beside him glanced over. "What do you mean?" The young delegate looked at the drifting fleets on the display. "This is what happens when humanity stops asking for permission to be underestimated." Back in Vrax space, the High Commander exhaled slowly. "And now," he asked, a question not defiance, of future. Varn responded without hesitation. "Now you recover." A pause. "Then you choose." The Vrax commander frowned slightly. "Choose what?" Varn's eyes did not move from the data streams. "Whether you repeat the cycle." The transmission ended. Not abruptly, not forcefully, just concluded, as if no further words were necessary. On the Resolute, systems began powering down from combat readiness. An officer glanced at Varn. "Sir, fleets are stabilizing across 3 sectors. No new hostilities detected." Varn nodded. "Hold position until full confirmation." "Yes, Commander." A pause. Then the officer asked more quietly, "Is it over?" Varn finally looked away from the display, out into the vastness beyond the viewport, where stars burned quietly, indifferent to the wars fought beneath them. He answered, "No." A beat. "Not yet." And that uncertainty rippled outward faster than any weapon ever had, because the galaxy had expected domination. It had expected punishment. It had even expected extinction. What it received instead was instruction. In the days that followed, the Vrax Dominion formally signed the ceasefire. Then the smaller factions followed. Then neutral systems. Then observers who had never considered themselves part of the conflict at all. Not because they were forced, but because they had finally understood something terrifyingly simple. Humanity was not the strongest force in the galaxy. It was the one that had learned what strength was for. And as the Resolute drifted silently back into the darkness between stars, no longer engaged, No longer firing, no longer needed. One final truth settled across every listening world. They had laughed at humans. They had tested humans. They had fought humans. But in the end, they learned from humans. And that is how respect was born.